Marcus wiped the sweat from his forehead as he pushed his cleaning cart down the marble hallway of the Blackstone mansion. The golden chandeliers above cast long shadows on the polished floor, making everything look like a scene from a movie. He had been working as a janitor here for 3 years, cleaning up after the wealthy Blackstone family and their endless stream of fancy guests. The mansion was huge, with 30 rooms spread across 3 floors. Marcus knew every corner, every stain, and every secret hiding spot where dust liked to gather. His calloused hands had scrubbed these floors countless times, and his back ached from bending over to pick up the messes left behind by people who had never cleaned anything. Themselves, at 42 years old, Marcus had dreams that seemed impossible now. He had grown up in a small apartment with his grandmother, who taught him to play piano on an old keyboard she bought from a thrift store. His fingers moved like magic across those keys, creating beautiful music that made his grandmother cry tears of joy. She always said he had a gift, something special that could take him places. But life had other plans. When his grandmother got sick, Marcus dropped out of music school to take care of her. The medical bills piled up like mountains, and soon he was working 3 jobs just to keep their tiny apartment. After she passed away, he kept working, sending money to his younger sister so she could finish college. The piano became a distant memory, something he only touched in his dreams. Now, as he cleaned the homes of the rich, Marcus often heard beautiful music floating through the halls. The Blackstone family had a grand piano in their main living room, a stunning black instrument that cost more than most people made in 5 years. Sometimes late at night when the family was asleep, Marcus would stop his cleaning and just stare at those keys, remembering the feeling of music flowing through his fingers. Tonight was different, though. The mansion was buzzing with activity because tomorrow was Isabella Blackstone's 18th birthday party. She was the only daughter of billionaire Robert Blackstone, a man who owned half the city's businesses. Isabella had everything money could buy: designer clothes, expensive cars, a future that was already planned out for her at the best universities. Marcus had watched Isabella grow up from a distance. She was beautiful and smart, but also spoiled and demanding. She treated the household staff like they were invisible, never saying thank you or even acknowledging their existence. To her, people like Marcus were just part of the background, no more important than the furniture they cleaned. As Marcus mopped the floor near the living room, he could hear Isabella on the phone with her friends, complaining about the party preparations. "The flowers are all wrong," she said in her high-pitched voice, "and the caterers better not mess up my cake. This party has to be perfect, or Daddy will hear about it." The grand piano sat silently in the corner, its black surface reflecting the crystal chandelier above. Marcus had polished that piano hundreds of times, always careful not to touch the keys. The family had made it clear that the staff was not allowed to play their instruments. "These are expensive pieces," Mr. Blackstone had said during Marcus's first week. "They're not toys for the help to mess with." But tonight, as Marcus cleaned around the piano, something stirred deep inside him. Maybe it was the stress of working double shifts to pay for his sister's textbooks. Or maybe it was the loneliness that had been eating at him since his grandmother died. Whatever it was, Marcus felt a pull toward those keys that he couldn't ignore. The mansion was quiet now. The Blackstone family had gone to bed early to rest before the big party. Marcus looked around to make sure he was alone, then slowly approached the piano bench. His heart pounded as he sat down and lifted the key cover. The black and white keys seemed to glow under the soft light, calling to him like old friends. Marcus placed his fingers on the keys and began to play. The music that came out was nothing like the classical pieces the Blackstones usually had performed at their parties. This was something deeper, something that came from the soul. It was a melody his grandmother had taught him years ago, mixed with his own pain and hope and dreams that refused to die. The notes filled the empty mansion, echoing off the marble walls and high ceilings. For the first time in years, Marcus felt alive again. His fingers remembered every chord, every transition, every emotional rise and fall. The music told the story of his life, the struggles, the sacrifices, the love he had for his family, and the dreams he had buried but never forgotten. He had played for 20 minutes, pouring his heart into every note. When he finally stopped, tears were running down his cheeks. The silence that followed felt heavy, like the mansion itself was holding its breath. Marcus quickly closed the piano and stood up, suddenly realizing what he had done. If anyone found out, he would lose his job immediately. Little did Marcus know that someone had been listening. Isabella Blackstone stood at the top of the grand staircase, having been awakened by the beautiful music. She had never heard anything so moving in her life. Hidden in the shadows, she watched as the janitor, a man she had never really noticed before, played with more skill and passion than any of the professional musicians her father hired for their parties. As Marcus gathered his cleaning supplies and prepared to finish his shift, he had no idea that his life was about to change forever. The music he thought no one would hear had touched the heart of someone who had the power to either destroy him or lift him up. Tomorrow's party would bring surprises that neither Marcus nor Isabella could have imagined. The next morning arrived with chaos. Isabella's birthday party was set to begin at 7 in the evening, and the mansion was crawling with decorators, caterers, and staff members running around like ants. Marcus arrived early for his shift, hoping to finish his cleaning duties before the guests started arriving. Isabella woke up with the mysterious music still playing in her head. She couldn't stop thinking about what she had witnessed the night before. The janitor's music had been more beautiful than anything she had ever heard. At the fancy concerts her parents dragged her to, there was something raw and honest about it that made her heart ache in a way she didn't understand. She had grown up surrounded by music teachers and professional performers, but none of them had ever made her feel what she felt last night. The way the janitor played, it was like he was telling his life story through the keys. Isabella found herself curious about this man she had walked past hundreds of times without ever really seeing. During breakfast, Isabella couldn't concentrate on her parents' conversation about the party details. Her mother, Patricia Blackstone, was going over the guest list for the 100th time, making sure all the important families would be attending. Her father was on his phone, making business deals, even on his daughter's birthday. "Isabella, are you listening?" her mother asked, noticing her daughter's distracted expression. "I was telling you about the surprise we have planned for tonight." "What surprise?" Isabella asked, finally paying attention. "Your father has hired the famous pianist, Jonathan Phillips, to perform at your party. He costs $20,000 for one performance, but nothing is too good for our princess," Patricia said with a proud smile. Isabella nodded and smiled, but inside she was thinking about the janitor's music. She wondered if the expensive pianist could play with half the emotion she had heard last night. Somehow she doubted it. Meanwhile, Marcus was in the basement, organizing the cleaning supplies for the party. He had barely slept after his moment at the piano. Part of him felt guilty for breaking the rules, but another part felt more alive than he had in years. The music had awakened something inside him that he thought was dead. "Marcus," called Helen, the head housekeeper. She was a stern woman in her 50s who had worked for the Blackstones for over a decade. "Mr. Blackstone wants to see all the staff in the main hall now." Marcus's heart skipped a beat. Did someone see him playing the piano? Had he left fingerprints on the keys? He followed Helen and the other staff members to the main hall, his mind racing with worry. Robert Blackstone stood at the center of the room, his expensive suit perfectly pressed and his gray hair slicked back. He was a tall man with cold blue eyes that seemed to look right through people. Behind him stood his wife, Patricia, and Isabella, who kept her eyes focused on the marble floor. "Tonight is my daughter's 18th birthday party," Mr. Blackstone began, his voice echoing in the large space. "We will have over 200 guests, including some very important people. I expect everything to be perfect. No mistakes, no accidents, and absolutely no disruptions." He paused and looked directly at Marcus, making him feel like a deer caught in headlights. "The staff will stay in the kitchen and basement areas during the party. You're not to interact with the guests unless absolutely necessary. And remember, you represent this household. Any embarrassment you cause will result in immediate termination." Marcus nodded along with the other staff members, relieved that no one seemed to know about his midnight piano session. But as the meeting ended and everyone started to disperse, Isabella surprised everyone by speaking up. "Excuse me," she said, her voice soft but clear. "What's the name of the janitor with the dark hair?" She was looking directly at Marcus. The room fell silent. Robert Blackstone turned to look at his daughter with confusion. "No." Isabella felt her cheeks turn red. but she stood her ground. "I've seen him working hard. I just thought it would be nice to know his name." Helen stepped forward, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "That's Marcus, Miss Isabella. He's been with us for 3 years. Nice to meet you, Marcus," Isabella said, making eye contact with him for the first time in all those years. Marcus was so shocked he could barely speak. "Thank you, Miss Isabella," he managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. Robert Blackstone frowned at this unusual exchange. "Isabella, we have more important things to worry about than the help. Come on, we need to discuss your dress for tonight." As the family left the room, Marcus stood there in stunned silence. Isabella had spoken to him. It's not only that, she had asked for his name. He couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, but he had no idea what. The rest of the day flew by in a blur of preparations. Marcus cleaned every surface until it sparkled, arranged flowers, and helped set up chairs for the guests. All the while, he kept thinking about the brief moment when Isabella had looked at him like he was actually a person, not just part of the furniture. As the afternoon turned to evening, the first guests began to arrive. Marcus watched from the kitchen window as expensive cars pulled up to the mansion's entrance. Men in fancy suits and women in designer dresses stepped out, laughing and chatting as they made their way into the party. The sound of classical music drifted through the mansion as a string quartet played in the main hall. But Marcus couldn't help remembering how much more beautiful the piano had sounded under his own fingers the night before. He wondered if he would ever get the chance to play like that again, or if last night would remain his one and only moment of musical freedom. Little did he know that Isabella had been watching him work all day, trying to gather the courage to approach him again. She had a plan forming in her mind, something that would shock everyone at the party. But first, she needed to find the right moment, and she needed to be brave enough to go through with it. The party was about to begin, and with it, a chain of events that would change both Marcus and Isabella's lives forever. By 8 o'clock, the Blackstone mansion was filled with the city's most wealthy and influential people. The main hall glittered with diamonds and gold jewelry as guests sipped champagne and made small talk about their latest business deals and vacation plans. Isabella moved through the crowd in her stunning white dress, receiving birthday wishes and expensive gifts, but her mind was elsewhere. She kept looking toward the kitchen, where she knew Marcus was working. Throughout the day, she had been building up the courage for what she planned to do. It was risky and would probably anger her parents, but something about the janitor's music had touched her soul in a way that made her want to be brave for once in her life. "Isabella, darling, you look absolutely radiant," said Mrs. Winchester, one of her mother's closest friends and biggest gossips in the city. 18 years old? You must be so excited about starting at Harvard in the fall." "Yes." "Thank you," Isabella replied politely, but her smile felt fake. Everything about this party felt fake. The compliments, the gifts, even the relationships. These people didn't really care about her. They were here because her father was rich and powerful. In the kitchen, Marcus was washing dishes and trying to stay out of everyone's way. The head chef was stressed about keeping the food perfect, and the waiters were rushing back and forth with trays of appetizers. Through the swinging doors, Marcus could hear the sound of laughter and music from the party. "Marcus, take this trash to the dumpster," Helen ordered, handing him several bags. "And make sure you go around the back. We can't have you walking through the party looking like that." Marcus nodded and took the bags, grateful for an excuse to get some fresh air. As he walked around the side of the mansion, he could see the party through the large windows. The guests looked like they belonged in a magazine, everything perfect and polished. He felt like he was watching a different world, one where people like him didn't exist. Just as he was about to head back inside, he heard footsteps behind him. Turning around, he was shocked to see Isabella approaching in her beautiful white dress. But instead of looking happy like a birthday girl should, she looked nervous and determined. "Marcus," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I need to talk to you." Marcus looked around nervously. "Miss Isabella, you shouldn't be out here. Your party is inside, and I need to get back to work." "Please," Isabella said, stepping closer. "I heard you playing piano last night." Marcus felt his stomach drop. This was it. He was going to lose his job, and his sister would have to drop out of college. Miss Isabella, I can explain it was beautiful, Isabella interrupted, her eyes filling with tears. It was the most beautiful music I've ever heard in my life. Marcus stared at her in disbelief. What? I've been taking piano lessons since I was 5 years old, Isabella continued. I've heard the best pianists in the world perform at our parties and at concert halls. But none of them ever made me feel what I felt when I heard you play last night. Marcus didn't know what to say. He had expected anger, threats, dismissal. He never expected this. Why are you telling me this? He asked softly. Isabella took a deep breath. Because I think those people in there need to hear real music, not the fake, emotionless performances they're used to. They need to hear something that comes from the heart. Miss Isabella, appreciate what you're saying, but I can't. Will you play at my party? Isabella asked suddenly. Marcus almost dropped the trash bags. What? No, absolutely not. Your father would fire me on the spot. Not if I ask you to, Isabella said, her voice growing stronger. It's my birthday party. I should be able to choose the entertainment, Miss Isabella. You don't understand. People like me don't perform at parties like this. I'm just the janitor. Isabella stepped closer, her eyes blazing with determination. You're not just anything, Marcus. You're a musician. A real one. And I want my guests to hear what real music sounds like. Before Marcus could respond, the back door of the mansion opened and Helen appeared, looking frantic. Miss Isabella, your parents are looking for you everywhere. It's time for the special performance. Isabella looked back at Marcus one more time. Think about it, she said quietly. Please. As she walked back toward the mansion with Helen, Marcus stood there in the darkness, his mind racing. What was she thinking? Did she really want him to play piano at her party, in front of all those rich people who would look at him like he was dirt on their shoes? Back inside, the party was reaching its peak. Robert Blackstone stood up and tapped his champagne glass with a silver spoon. Getting everyone's attention? Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, his voice booming across the room. Thank you all for being here to celebrate my daughter Isabella's 18th birthday. As a special surprise, I've arranged for the renowned pianist Jonathan Phillips to perform for us tonight. The crowd applauded as a tall, thin man in an expensive tuxedo walked over to the grand piano. Jonathan Phillips was famous for his technical perfection and had performed for presidents and royalty around the world. He sat down at the piano with practiced elegance and began to play a complex classical piece. The music was technically perfect. Every note was precise. Every timing was exact. The guests nodded and smiled appreciatively, recognizing the expensive talent they were witnessing. But Isabella felt nothing. Compared to what she had heard the night before, this felt cold and empty, like a robot playing music instead of a human being, as Jonathan Phillips continued his performance. Isabella made a decision that would shock everyone in the room. She had been playing it safe her entire life, doing what was expected of her, never making waves or causing trouble. But something about Marcus's music had awakened a part of her that was tired of living in a cage made of money and expectations. When Jonathan Phillips finished his piece and took his bow, Isabella stood up before her father could introduce the next song. Thank you, Mr. Phillips, she said, her voice carrying across the room. That was very nice, but I have a different kind of surprise for everyone tonight. Robert Blackstone looked at his daughter with confusion. In growing concern, this wasn't part of the plan they had discussed. Patricia Blackstone also looked worried, sensing that something unexpected was about to happen. I want to introduce someone who plays music the way it's supposed to be played, Isabella continued, her heart pounding. From the heart, with real emotion and passion, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Marcus Thompson. The room fell silent. No one moved. Most of the guests had no idea who Marcus Thompson was, but they could tell from Robert Blackstone's horrified expression that something was very wrong with this picture. The silence in the room was deafening. 200 of the city's wealthiest people stood frozen, champagne glasses halfway to their lips as they tried to process what Isabella had just said. Robert Blackstone's face turned bright red, and Patricia looked like she might faint. Isabella, what are you doing? Her father hissed through gritted teeth. trying to keep his voice low enough that the guests couldn't hear. But Isabella wasn't backing down. She had crossed a line, and there was no going back now. "Marcus," she called out, looking toward the kitchen. "Please come out here." In the kitchen, Marcus heard his name being called and felt his blood turn to ice. Helen and the other staff members stared at him with wide eyes, unable to believe what was happening. This was social suicide for both him and Isabella. "Don't you dare go out there," Helen whispered urgently. "This will ruin everything," but something in Isabella's voice called to the same. Part of Marcus that had made him sit down at the piano the night before, against every logical thought in his head, found himself walking toward the main hall. When Marcus appeared in the doorway, still wearing his simple work clothes, the guests began to murmur among themselves. Some of them recognized him as the janitor who had cleaned up after their parties over the years. Others had never noticed him at all, which somehow made this moment even more shocking. "This is Marcus," Isabella announced, her voice stronger now. "He's been working in our home for 3 years, and last night I discovered that he's the most talented musician I've ever heard." Jonathan Phillips, still standing beside the piano, looked insulted and confused. He had been paid $20,000 to perform, and now he was being upstaged by the help. Mrs. Winchester and several other guests began whispering behind their hands, clearly scandalized by what they were witnessing. Isabella, Robert Blackstone, said more forcefully, stepping toward his daughter, "This is inappropriate. Marcus, go back to the kitchen immediately." But Isabella moved to stand between her father and Marcus. "No, Daddy, this is my birthday party. I want Marcus to play piano for my guests." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Marcus stood there feeling completely out of place in his work uniform, surrounded by people wearing clothes that cost more than he made in a year. Every instinct told him to run, to apologize, to go back to being invisible. "Miss Isabella," he said quietly, "maybe this isn't a good idea. Please." "Marcus," Isabella said, turning to look at him with pleading eyes. "These people have everything money can buy, but they've never heard music that comes from real experience, from struggle, from love. You can give them something they've never had before." Marcus looked around the room at all the faces staring at him. Some looked curious, others looked disgusted, and most looked uncomfortable. He thought about his grandmother, who had always told him that music was a gift meant to be shared. He thought about his sister working hard in college to build a better life. He thought about all the years he had spent cleaning up after these people, invisible and unappreciated. Maybe it was time to stop being invisible. "Okay," Marcus said, so quietly that Isabella had to lean closer to hear him. "I'll play one song." The crowd stirred with a mixture of excitement and horror. This was either going to be the most memorable birthday party in the city's social history, or the biggest disaster any of them had ever witnessed. Marcus walked slowly toward the grand piano, his hands shaking slightly. Jonathan Phillips stepped aside with a sneer, clearly expecting this amateur to embarrass himself. Robert Blackstone looked like he was planning to fire everyone in his household, starting with Marcus. As Marcus sat down at the piano bench, he could hear people whispering about him. "Who does he think he is? This is humiliating. Poor Isabella has lost her mind. I can't believe we're—" Watching the janitor pretend to be a musician, Marcus closed his eyes and tried to block out the voices. He thought about his grandmother's hands guiding his fingers across the keys when he was 8 years old. He thought about the music school he had left behind to take care of her. He thought about all the nights he had dreamed of playing for an audience, never imagining it would happen like this. When he opened his eyes and looked out at the crowd, he saw Isabella standing near the front, her eyes full of hope and encouragement. That gave him the courage he needed. Marcus placed his fingers on the keys and began to play. The music that came out was nothing like the classical piece Jonathan Phillips had performed. This was jazz mixed with blues, with touches of gospel and soul. It was the sound of heartbreak and hope, of dreams deferred but not destroyed. It was the story of a man who had lost everything but still found beauty in the world at first. The guests continued their whispered conversations, treating Marcus's performance like background music. But gradually, the talking stopped. One by one, people began to really listen to what they were hearing. The melody Marcus played was simple but profound. His left hand created a rhythm that seemed to match the heartbeat of everyone in the room, while his right hand told a story that went beyond words. He played about working 3 jobs to pay for his grandmother's medicine. He played about holding her hand as she died. He played about watching his sister walk across the stage at her high school graduation. He played about loneliness and hope and the kind of love that sacrifices everything for family. Mrs. Winchester, who had been ready to leave in disgust, found herself with tears in her eyes. Mr. Harrison, a steel company owner who prided himself on never showing emotion, had to clear his throat several times. Even some of the younger guests who usually spent parties texting on their phones were completely focused on the music. Isabella watched the faces in the crowd change from skepticism to wonder. This was exactly what she had hoped would happen. These people who thought they had experienced everything money could buy were hearing something priceless for the first time. But not everyone was moved by Marcus's performance. A small group of guests, led by Mrs. Winchester's son Bradley, began making mocking comments just loud enough for others to hear. "This is ridiculous," Bradley said with a laugh. "Are we really supposed to be impressed by the janitor banging on the piano?" His friends chuckled and nodded in agreement. "Next thing you know, they'll have the gardener singing opera," one of them added. Their laughter carried across the room, and Marcus could hear every word. His playing faltered for just a moment as doubt crept into his mind. Maybe they were right. Maybe he was just fooling himself, thinking he belonged in the same room as these people. But then he looked at Isabella again, and he saw something in her eyes that gave him strength. She believed in him, even when he didn't believe in himself. And more importantly, he could see that his music was touching some people in the room, even if others chose to mock it. Marcus's fingers found their rhythm again, and he continued playing with even more passion than before. The song built to a crescendo that seemed to shake the very walls of the mansion, then softened into a gentle ending that left the room in complete silence. When the last note faded away, nobody moved. The silence stretched on for what felt like forever, and Marcus wondered if he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. The silence that followed Marcus's performance felt like it lasted forever. He sat at the piano, his hands still trembling slightly from the emotion he had poured into the music. 200 pairs of eyes stared at him, and he couldn't tell if they were amazed or horrified by what they had just witnessed. Then, from somewhere in the middle of the crowd, came the sound of one person clapping. Slowly, tentatively, but steadily. Other guests turned to see who it was, and Marcus was surprised to discover it was Mr. Harrison, the tough steel company owner who never showed emotion at business meetings. "That was extraordinary," Mr. Harrison said, his voice carrying across the silent room. "I've been to 100 concerts in my life. I've never heard anything that moved me like that." His words seemed to break a spell. Suddenly, more people began applauding. Not everyone, but enough to create a wave of appreciation that rolled through the room. Mrs. Winchester wiped tears from her eyes as she clapped. Several other guests nodded in approval, clearly touched by what they had experienced, but the room was divided. Bradley and his group of young socialites continued to sneer and whisper among themselves. "It's just noise," Bradley said, loud enough for people around him to hear. "My 3-year-old nephew could play better than that." Robert Blackstone stood frozen, unsure how to react. Part of him was furious that his daughter had disrupted the carefully planned party. But he could see that many of his important guests were genuinely moved by Marcus's performance. And these were people whose opinions mattered to his business. Isabella beamed with pride as she watched the mixed reactions around the room. She had known this would be controversial, but she believed it was worth it. Marcus deserved to be heard, and these people needed to experience real music, even if some of them were too close-minded to appreciate it. "Thank you, Marcus," Isabella said, walking over to the piano. "That was beautiful." Marcus stood up slowly, still not quite believing what had just happened. He had played piano for the wealthiest people in the city, and some of them had actually enjoyed it. But he could also see the disapproval on many faces, including Robert Blackstone's. "I should get back to work now," Marcus said quietly, starting to move away from the piano. But before he could leave, Mrs. Harrison stepped forward. She was an elegant woman in her 60s who owned several art galleries downtown. "Wait," she said, her voice clear and authoritative. "Young man, where did you learn to play like that?" Marcus hesitated, unsure if he should answer. All eyes were on him again, and he felt incredibly out of place in his work clothes among all the formal wear. "My grandmother taught me when I was young," he said finally. "And I went to music school for a while." "Which school?" Mrs. Harrison asked, genuinely interested. "Berklee College of Music in Boston," Marcus replied. "But I had to leave after 2 years to take care of my grandmother." A murmur went through the crowd. Berklee was one of the most prestigious music schools in the country. Several guests looked impressed, while others seemed surprised that the janitor had such a background. "And you've been working here for 3 years?" Mrs. Harrison continued. "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Harrison turned to address the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've just witnessed something remarkable. This young man has more natural talent than most of the professional musicians we pay thousands of dollars to hear. And he's been cleaning our messes while we ignored his gift." Bradley laughed mockingly from across the room. "Oh, come on, Mrs. Harrison. He's the help. This is all very touching, but let's not get carried away. He played one song at a birthday party. One song that was worth more than any performance I've heard this year." Mrs. Harrison shot back, her voice sharp with disapproval. "You might learn something if you opened your mind instead of your mouth." Bradley. The tension in the room was growing thicker by the minute. Some guests were nodding in agreement with Mrs. Harrison, while others seemed to side with Bradley's dismissive attitude. Isabella watched nervously as her birthday party turned into a social battlefield. Robert Blackstone finally decided he needed to take control of the situation. "I think we should return to the scheduled entertainment," he announced, his voice cutting through the debate. "Mr. Phillips has prepared several more pieces for us, but Jonathan Phillips." The professional pianist looked uncomfortable. Marcus's raw, emotional performance had highlighted how cold and mechanical his own playing had sounded. He was technically superior, but he lacked the heart that Marcus had shown. "Actually," Jonathan Phillips said, "surprising everyone, I think the young man should play another piece. He has something special that can't be taught." The crowd stirred with renewed interest. Even the famous pianist was acknowledging Marcus's talent. This was unprecedented in their social circle. Bradley couldn't let it go. "This is ridiculous," he said, his voice getting louder. "We're not running a charity here." The janitor had his moment. "Now, let's move on." "What's your problem, Bradley?" Isabella suddenly spoke up, her patience finally snapping. "Are you threatened by someone who actually has talent instead of just daddy's money?" The room gasped. Isabella had just broken one of the biggest rules of high society. She had publicly criticized another wealthy family's child. This kind of direct confrontation was unheard of at their polite gatherings. Bradley's face turned red with anger and embarrassment. "At least I don't make a fool of myself defending the help," he shot back. "This whole thing is pathetic, Isabella. You're acting like some kind of rebellious teenager. Maybe someone needs to act like a rebellious teenager around here." Isabella replied, her voice growing stronger. "Maybe someone needs to point out that we're all so busy being impressed with ourselves that we can't recognize real talent when it's right in front of us." Nightclothes Marks watched this argument unfold with growing concern. He had never intended to cause problems for Isabella, or to start a fight at her birthday party. The last thing he wanted was to get her in trouble with her family and friends. "Miss Isabella," he said, stepping forward, "maybe I should go back to the kitchen now." "I don't want to cause any more trouble." "No," Isabella said firmly. "You're not going anywhere. This is my party, and I want you to play another song." Robert Blackstone had heard enough. "Isabella, that's enough," he said sternly. "You're embarrassing our family and our guests. Marcus, return to your duties immediately." But Mrs. Harrison spoke up again before Marcus could move. "Robert, with all due respect, your daughter is right. We've just witnessed something extraordinary, and instead of celebrating it, half of us are acting like spoiled children." She turned to address the entire room. "How many of us can say we've ever heard music that moved us to tears? How many of us have ever experienced art that actually touched our souls instead of just impressing our friends? This young man has a gift, and instead of appreciating it, some of you are more concerned about social boundaries than human talent." The crowd was completely divided now. Some guests nodded in agreement with Mrs. Harrison, while others looked uncomfortable with the direction the evening had taken. A few couples near the back started quietly making their way toward the exit, clearly wanting no part of the drama that was unfolding. Marcus stood in the middle of it all, feeling like he was in the eye of a hurricane. His simple decision to play piano had unleashed forces he never could have imagined. He looked at Isabella, who was facing down her father with a determination he had never seen from her before. Whatever happened next? Marcus realized that this night had changed everything. The standoff between Isabella and her father seemed to freeze everyone in place. Robert Blackstone was a man who was used to getting his way, but his daughter had never challenged him so publicly before. The guests watched with fascination and horror as the perfect Blackstone family facade began to crack in front of their eyes. "Isabella, we will discuss this privately," Robert said through clenched teeth. "Everyone, please excuse this interruption. Let's return to the celebration." But Isabella wasn't backing down. Something had awakened in her that night, something that had been sleeping under years of private schools, etiquette lessons, and expectations to be the perfect society daughter. "No, Daddy," she said, her voice carrying across the room. "We're going to discuss this right here, right now." She turned to face all the guests, her white birthday dress making her look like a young warrior princess. "How many of you actually know the names of the people who work in your homes? How many of you have ever asked about their dreams, their families, their talents?" The room shifted uncomfortably. Most of these people employed dozens of staff members, maids, gardeners, drivers, cooks, but treated them like pieces of furniture. Isabella's questions hit too close to home. "Marcus has been cleaning our house for 3 years, Isabella continued.
3 years.
"And not one of us ever knew he was a trained musician who gave up his dreams to take care of his sick grandmother. Not one of us ever bothered to see him as anything more than someone to pick up our messes." Mrs. Harrison nodded approvingly, while Bradley and his friends rolled their eyes. The divide in the room was becoming more obvious by the minute. Marcus felt overwhelmed by Isabella's passionate defense of him. No one had ever stood up for him like this before, especially not someone who had everything to lose by doing so. But he also felt guilty that her birthday party was being ruined because of him. "Miss Isabella," he said gently, "you don't have to do this. I appreciate everything you're saying, but I don't want to cause problems for you and your family." Isabella turned to look at him, her eyes blazing with determination. "Marcus, you're not causing problems. You're showing people what they've been missing their whole lives. Real talent, real emotion, real music that comes from the heart instead of from a bank account. That's enough." Robert Blackstone's voice boomed across the room. "Isabella, you are grounded indefinitely. Marcus, you're fired. Security will escort you out immediately." A collective gasp went up from the crowd. This drama was more entertaining than anything they had experienced at a social gathering in years. But it was also deeply uncomfortable to watch a family falling apart in public. But before security could move, Mrs. Harrison stepped forward again. "Robert, before you make any hasty decisions, I have a proposition." All eyes turned to her. Mrs. Harrison was not just wealthy. She was influential in the city's arts community. Her opinion carried weight that even Robert Blackstone had to respect. "Marcus," she said, looking directly at him, "I own 3 art galleries downtown, and I host musical events throughout the year. I would like to offer you a job as my events coordinator and house pianist. The salary is $50,000 a year, plus benefits." The room erupted in whispers. $50,000 was more than Marcus had ever dreamed of making. It was enough to support his sister through college and maybe even return to music school himself. Marcus stared at Mrs. Harrison in disbelief. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious," she replied. "Talent like yours shouldn't be wasted scrubbing floors, no matter how expensive those floors are." Robert Blackstone's face was turning an alarming shade of purple. Not only was his authority being challenged, but now one of his most important social connections was trying to steal his employee right in front of everyone. "Dorothy, this is highly inappropriate," he said to Mrs. Harrison. "You're interfering in my household affairs." "I'm recognizing talent when I see it, Robert," Mrs. Harrison replied coolly. something that apparently doesn't happen often in this household. Bradley couldn't resist jumping back into the conflict. "This is insane," he said loudly. "You're all acting like the janitor just cured cancer. He played one song on a piano." "Big deal." "You know what, Bradley?" Isabella said, wheeling around to face him. "You're absolutely right. It is a big deal when someone with real talent gets recognition. Maybe if you had any talent besides spending your father's money, you'd understand that." The insult hit Bradley like a slap in the face. His friends tried to hide their smirks, but several guests openly chuckled at Isabella's sharp comeback. Bradley had been insulting people all evening, and it was satisfying to see him get a taste of his own medicine. "At least I know my place in society," Bradley shot back. "It's like some people who think they're revolutionary for befriending the help." That comment pushed Isabella over the edge. She had been raised to be polite and proper, but she was done with fake niceness and social rules that kept good people invisible. "You want to know what I think about your precious society?" Isabella said, her voice rising. "I think it's full of people who mistake money for worth, who confuse expensive taste with good judgment, and who are so afraid of anything real that they'd rather mock talent than celebrate it." The room was dead silent now. Isabella had just insulted half the people at her own birthday party, including some of her family's oldest friends and most important business connections. Patricia Blackstone finally found her voice. Isabella Marie Blackstone apologized to our guests immediately, but Isabella was beyond apologies. "I'm not sorry, Mother. I'm sorry it took me 18 years to realize that most of the people we call friends are just snobs who judge others based on their bank accounts instead of their character." Marcus watched this unfold with a mixture of admiration and terror. Isabella was burning bridges that could never be rebuilt, all because she believed in his music. He felt honored and guilty at the same time. "Miss Isabella," he said quietly. "Maybe we should all just calm down and know, Marcus," Isabella interrupted. "I'm tired of calming down. I'm tired of pretending that people like Bradley matter more than people like you just because they were born rich." Mrs. Harrison smiled approvingly. "Isabella, you have more courage than most adults twice your age." "She has more foolishness than sense," Robert Blackstone growled. "And she's forgotten that everything she has comes from this family and our position in society." Isabella looked at her father with sad eyes. "Daddy, I love you, but I can't be the person you want me to be anymore. Tonight I heard something beautiful, something real, and I can't go back to pretending that fake politeness and empty social climbing are more important than recognizing genuine talent and good people." She turned back to Marcus. "Mrs. Harrison offered you a job. I think you should take it." Marcus looked around the room at all the faces watching him. Some looked encouraging, others looked disgusted, but all of them were paying attention to him in a way they never had before. For the first time in 3 years, he wasn't invisible. But accepting the job would mean leaving behind the security he had known, taking a risk on a new life that might not work out. It would also mean accepting that Isabella had sacrificed her relationship with her family to defend him. The decision he made next would change everything. Marcus looked around the room one final time, taking in the faces of people who had walked past him for 3 years without seeing him. Tonight, everything had changed. He thought about his grandmother, who had always told him that music was a gift meant to be shared with the world. He thought about his sister working hard in college to build a better future. Most of all, he thought about Isabella, who had risked everything to give him this chance. "Mrs. Harrison," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the trembling in his hands, "I accept your offer." The room erupted in surprised murmurs. Some guests applauded, while others looked shocked that the janitor had the nerve to accept such a prestigious position. Bradley shook his head in disgust, but Mrs. Harrison smiled with satisfaction. "Excellent," Mrs. Harrison said. "You can start Monday morning. We'll discuss the details tomorrow." Robert Blackstone's face was now beyond purple, approaching something closer to crimson. "This is outrageous," he sputtered. "Dorothy, you're making a huge mistake. And Isabella, you are no longer welcome at this party. Go to your room immediately." But Isabella stood her ground. "Actually, Daddy, I think I'll be leaving with Marcus. This party stopped being about me the moment everyone started arguing about whether people like him deserve respect." The gasps from the crowd were audible now. Isabella Blackstone, the princess of high society, was walking away from her own 18th birthday party to leave with the former janitor. This would be the scandal that people talked about for years. "Isabella, if you walk out that door, don't bother coming back," Robert Blackstone warned, his voice shaking with rage. Isabella paused at the door and turned back to look at her father. For a moment, Marcus saw the scared 18-year-old girl beneath the brave exterior she had been showing all night. But then her expression strengthened again. "I love you, Daddy," she said softly. "But I won't apologize for recognizing goodness when I see it, or for standing up for what's right." She looked over at Marcus. "Are you ready to go?" Marcus nodded, still hardly believing this was really happening. As they walked toward the exit together, Mrs. Harrison called out to them. "Marcus, Isabella, wait one moment," she said. She turned to address the entire room. "I want everyone here to remember this night. You've just witnessed something extraordinary. A young woman who chose character over comfort, and a talented man who was given the chance he deserved. This is what real class looks like." Some guests applauded, but others remained silent or shook their heads in disapproval. Bradley muttered something about bleeding heart nonsense. His words were lost in the general commotion, as Marcus and Isabella left the mansion together. They could hear the party continuing behind them, though the atmosphere would never recover from the drama that had unfolded. They walked down the long driveway in silence, both processing what had just happened. Miss Isabella, Marcus finally said, "You didn't have to give up everything for me." "Your family, your friends, your whole future, Marcus," Isabella interrupted. "My name is just Isabella, and I didn't give up anything important. I chose something real over something fake. That's not a sacrifice. That's the best decision I've ever made." They reached the end of the driveway, where Marcus realized he didn't even have a car to offer Isabella a ride. He had always taken the bus to work, but Isabella surprised him by pulling out her phone and calling for a taxi. "Where will you go?" Marcus asked, concerned about her immediate future. Isabella smiled, and for the first time that evening, she looked truly happy instead of just determined. "Mrs. Harrison offered you a job, but she didn't offer me one. I think I'll ask her if she needs an assistant. I've always been interested in art, and maybe it's time I learned what it's like to actually work for a living." 6 months later, Marcus stood on the stage of the Grand Theater downtown, preparing for his first major piano concert. The theater was sold out, with tickets priced at $50 each instead of the thousands that celebrity pianists usually charged. Mrs. Harrison had promoted the concert as an evening of heart and soul with Marcus Thompson, and the response had been overwhelming in the audience. Marcus could see his sister Maria, who had come home from college for the event. Beside her sat Mrs. Harrison, beaming with pride at her protégé's success. And in the front row, Isabella sat wearing a simple but elegant dress. No longer the spoiled rich girl, but a young woman who had discovered the satisfaction of earning her own way in the world. The past 6 months had been challenging for both Marcus and Isabella. Marcus had worked harder than ever, preparing concerts and learning the business side of the music world. Isabella had moved into a small apartment and taken a job as Mrs. Harrison's assistant, learning about art gallery management while discovering talent she never knew she had, Robert and Patricia. Blackstone had eventually forgiven their daughter, though their relationship remained strained. They attended the concert that night, sitting awkwardly in the back row, still not entirely sure how to process the changes in their daughter's life. Even Bradley was there. Brought by his parents, who wanted to show support for Mrs. Harrison, he still looked uncomfortable. But he no longer made mocking comments about Marcus's music. The success of the concert and the positive reviews in the newspapers had made it difficult to dismiss Marcus's talent as anything less than extraordinary. As Marcus began to play his opening piece, the same melody he had played that night at Isabella's birthday party, he felt a sense of completeness he had never experienced before. The music flowed through him and out into the theater, touching the hearts of everyone present. This time, when he finished playing, there was no awkward silence. The audience erupted in thunderous applause that seemed to go on forever. People stood up, cheering and calling for more. Marcus looked out at the crowd and saw tears in many eyes. including his own. After the concert, as people crowded around to congratulate him, Marcus found himself standing with Isabella near the stage door. The girl who had once been a spoiled rich princess had become a strong, independent young woman who was making her own mark on the world. "Thank you," Marcus said to her, "for seeing something in me that I had forgotten was there." Isabella smiled. "Thank you for reminding me that the most important things in life can't be bought with money. They have to be earned with courage." As they walked out into the night together, surrounded by friends and supporters, Marcus realized that sometimes the most beautiful music comes not just from the piano keys, but from the courage to be true to yourself and to stand up for what's right. The janitor who had once been invisible had found his voice, and the rich girl who had everything had discovered what was truly worth having. Their story became legend in the city, a reminder that real worth has nothing to do with bank accounts and everything to do with the courage to recognize and defend what matters most. And in the years that followed, whenever someone heard the name Marcus Thompson, they remembered not just his beautiful music, but the night when a young woman's courage helped transform a janitor's life and reminded an entire room full of wealthy people that the most valuable things in the world cannot be purchased, they can only be recognized, celebrated, and shared.